Access Minnesota, issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts.
Welcome to Access Minnesota. Coming up later on in the show, a look at a new exhibit at the Science Museum in St. Paul called the Dead Sea Scrolls, Words That Change the World. But first, the University of Minnesota is facing major budget cuts. It's a problem that's challenging colleges and universities around the country, and there are growing fears that a higher education is becoming more unaffordable for people of modest means. We talk with University of Minnesota President Bob Bruininks about the challenges facing higher education. University of Minnesota President Bob Bruininks, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Well, it's great to be with you, Jim.
State funding for the University of Minnesota has been declining steadily over the past several years. It's a trend that colleges and universities across the country are dealing with. Are we witnessing the slow extinction of public funding for higher education? And if so, what does that mean for the University of Minnesota?
I don't think we're witnessing any kind of slow distinction, but I think if you look at the trend lines over the last 30 years in Minnesota and other states throughout the country, you'll see that states tend to cut higher education disproportionately in times of economic recession. After the recession wanes, there's a tendency to put some of that money back, but you rarely get to the pre-recessionary levels. And so over a 30-year period, we have actually lost very significant amounts of state funding here at the University of Minnesota. Not as much as some other states, but it's certainly a substantial amount. In this particular decade, the amount of funding for the University of Minnesota in 2010 is roughly the same amount of money we had in the year 2000. So we haven't gained a nickel, basically, in state support. And during this 10-year period, all of the cost increases of the University of Minnesota and all of the inflationary pressures we've experienced have been absorbed by the University of Minnesota through tuition increases, through cost reductions, through budget cutting, through the growth of other sources of revenue. So it'd be safe to say that we've really lost ground in terms of state support. But let me just say one thing. I am really proud of the fact that we're called the University of Minnesota, and I'm really proud of the fact that our state does in fact support us and support us relatively well. Many states don't have a capital bill for higher education. We just received $90 million of vitally important capital support to upgrade the facilities of the University of Minnesota, to make sure we have modern classrooms for our students. And so while we've experienced a lot of difficulty in our budget, it's also important to emphasize that the state is still a very big partner for the University of Minnesota. It provides nearly $600 million a year in financial support. And without that support, it would be very difficult for the University of Minnesota to retain its standing as one of the most productive universities in the country.
Tuition has been increasing at the university an average of 3% since 2001. Is this trend likely to continue as public funding continues to decline?
Well, I think tuition has gone up in nominal terms, much more than 3% a year. But what we have done at the University of Minnesota, and it's, I think, an accomplishment we can be very proud of, is we have done an extraordinary job of holding down costs, particularly in the non-educational areas of our budget. So housing, food, utilities, all of those things that have to do with operating the university, we've had very, very tough cost control on those issues. And then we went out and raised over $300 million in private support to provide grants and scholarships to our students. And that has allowed us to maintain the net cost increase. So if you take what we provide students in the way of grants and aid and scholarship support, the net cost increase for the average student attending campuses of the University of Minnesota has gone up about 3% a year. And that's a phenomenal accomplishment in a period in which we have seen two recessions not just one, not the one we're in now, but we actually had one in the early 2000s. In fact, when I was asked to serve as president, one of the great gifts I got was a $185 million budget cut within about 2 or 3 months. So this has been a tough road, but I take a lot of pride in the fact that we finished this decade, or we will finish this decade, with higher education actually being more accessible and more affordable, financially accessible and affordable for people of average means in our state. We have something called the University of Minnesota Promise Scholarship. It's based on family income all the way up to $100,000 a year. 13,000 Minnesota students are on that scholarship. I think it's the best need-based scholarship program in the country. But that's just one of many things we've done to try to keep access to higher education really affordable.
The state is facing a significant budget deficit in this biennium, and that's having a major impact on the University of Minnesota. But the budget deficit will likely grow worse in the years to come. Are we going to see things get worse before they get better for the university?
Well, Jim, things could get worse for the university. If the state budget continues to decline, we could take additional budget reductions as the costs increase at the University of Minnesota. Generally, our costs increase about $60 to $80 million a year, regardless of what kind of support we get from the state of Minnesota. So further budget cuts would represent a very big challenge for us, particularly since we've had a number of them during this past 10 years. So we face some real challenges. Most of them are related to the Minnesota tax system. It's really not indexed very well to the global economy and the modern economy. We obviously are still in the throes of an economic recovery that is slower than past recoveries after a recession. So I think we have some big challenges. At the same time, there are some people that are really working on these issues. We have made some very deep budget reductions at the state of Minnesota, which will carry over in the next biennium and solve some of the problems. The recent health care bill that passed the Congress and was signed by the president actually provides some financial relief for states. The jobs bill does the same thing. And so with economic recovery, some of the hard decisions that have been made here at the university and elsewhere, plus some help that may be on its way from the health care bill and the jobs bill, all of this may add up to a little bit better situation in the next 2 years than people anticipate at the present time. But there's little question that we will have very, very severe pressures on the state budget. And whatever that number is in terms of the deficit for the next 2 years, it will be a big number and it'll be very challenging for us to address.
When Access Minnesota returns, more of our interview with University of Minnesota President Bob Bruininks.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.